Why did her silence unsettle them? The room was crowded, yet it felt empty around her. Radios hummed low. Paper maps rustled beneath restless hands. The air smelled of stale coffee, gun oil, and the kind of nerves men tried to mask with sharp voices. Orders moved like bullets, ricocheting from one officer to another, but she didn't speak. She hadn't in hours. She sat at the edge of the briefing table, eyes lowered, fingers tracing the rim of a steel cup. They thought she was listening. They thought her silence meant agreement, compliance, discipline, but it wasn't that. Her silence was a wall. Behind it lived a truth, one she hadn't shared, one she couldn't. Not yet. Someone glanced at her, a captain with square shoulders and restless eyes. He read her stillness as calm, maybe even loyalty. He didn't know she was counting seconds, not on the clock, on her heartbeat. She looked at the map spread across the table. Red circles marked hostile zones. Black arrows cut through valleys. It was a mess of ink and urgency. But beneath the clutter of lines, her gaze found the place no one else was pointing to. A mountain pass, narrow and silent, where shadows stretched longer than daylight. She knew it. She remembered it. The memory burned like frost. Because once, years ago, she'd stood there, not as a soldier, not as an operative, but as a daughter. And that was the truth her eyes carried in the dark. She closed them just for a second, the voices around her blurred. She could still hear the wind of that place, high and cold, brushing against her face. She could still see her father's figure walking ahead, a man who believed silence was strength, who taught her that not every battle was won with noise. And she remembered the day he didn't return. The orders snapped her back. The room shifted. Men stood, chairs scraped, the mission brief rolled forward without her voice in it. She didn't argue, she didn't correct them. She let them think her silence was compliance. Because if she spoke, if she told them what she really knew, none of them would look at her the same. So she stood, pulled her jacket over her shoulders, and followed the rest into the night. But as the engines roared and the convoy prepared to move, she touched the inside pocket of her jacket. A folded piece of paper pressed against her chest, a letter, unread. And that was the weight she carried into the dark. The engines growled low as they rolled out of base, headlights slicing across gravel and dust. Inside the armored vehicle, the air was thick with a silence of its own. Boots tapped against steel flooring, rifles rested against knees, breaths drew steady but shallow. The men exchanged glances, nods, short words. She stayed quiet. "Don't mind her," one of them muttered, half joking, half uneasy. "She's always like that." Another smirked. "Spooks me sometimes, like she's hearing ghosts the rest of us don't." She didn't react, didn't defend herself, because it wasn't wrong. She did hear them, the voices of people who weren't there anymore, the echoes of choices that still rattled through her bones. She turned her face to the window, watching shadows drag across the earth. The convoy crept forward, metal and men bound to a path they thought they understood. She let them think she was only watching, but inside her head she was measuring. Every bend in the dirt road, every rise in the terrain, every echo of her father's footsteps in a place she once swore she'd never return to. The captain broke the silence. "We've got one shot at this." His voice was clipped hard, in and out. "Secure the target, confirm the intel, no improvising. We stick to the map." "Understood." The men nodded. Someone grunted agreement. She only blinked. Her silence drew another glance from the captain, but he turned away. He didn't push her. He thought her quiet was submission. He thought it meant she trusted him. But she didn't. Because she knew the map was wrong. Hours later, the convoy slowed, engines muffled to a near growl. The mountains rose around them, jagged teeth cutting into the sky. The wind funneled through the pass, carrying grit that stung eyes and throats. The men dismounted, boots crunching against gravel, rifles shifting into ready positions. Their breaths puffed in short, sharp clouds. She followed last, stepping down from the vehicle like a shadow breaking away from stone. Her rifle was slung low, her posture quiet but steady. Her eyes swept the terrain, not in quick scans like the others, but with the patience of someone who knew how shadows lied. The captain raised a hand. We move, split into 2 teams. We take the left ridge, secure the outpost, confirm. Stop. Her voice cut through the night. The first word she had spoken since morning. The men froze. Even the wind seemed to pause, curling around the rocks as if waiting. The captain turned, irritation flaring in his eyes. Excuse me. She lifted her chin, gaze fixed on the ridge. Left ridge is a trap. Murmurs rippled through the men. Someone shifted uneasily, boots scraping gravel. The captain's jaw tightened. And what makes you so sure? She didn't answer right away. Didn't explain how she remembered the patterns of sound here, how the silence was too perfect, how her father once told her that true danger wears quiet like a mask. She just looked at the ridge, then back at him. Her eyes, steady and dark, said what her voice didn't. Because she couldn't tell them the truth, that she had been here before. That the last time she walked this pass, she walked with a man who never came back. That she knew how the enemy thought because she'd seen it, lived through it, survived it. The captain frowned, torn between protocol and doubt. The others shifted, uneasy in the weight of her voice. It wasn't just what she said. It was the way she said it. Calm, certain, like she'd already walked the ground they hadn't yet touched. Finally, he muttered, "We'll take the right ridge." The formation shifted. The men adjusted. They didn't thank her. They didn't ask questions. They just moved because something in her silence unsettled them enough to obey. As they climbed, boots crunching against loose stone, the air thinned. The wind pressed harder, cutting against exposed skin. Their breaths came heavier, slower. She moved like water, silent but constant, every step measured, every glance deliberate. Her silence became a rhythm the others began to follow without realizing it. Halfway up the ridge, a sound cracked the night. Sharp, sudden, a rifle shot. The men dropped, scrambling for cover, hearts slamming in their chests. Shouts ricocheted between rocks. The captain barked orders. She didn't shout. She pressed her cheek to stone, eyes narrowing. She listened. The echo of the shot rolled through the pass, bouncing, twisting. She counted the seconds, 3, 4, then silence again. She exhaled, slow. The shot wasn't aimed to kill, it was meant to lure. She turned her head toward the left ridge, the one she'd warned them about. Faint glints shimmered in the darkness, glass, steel, movement. Dozens of rifles aimed at the empty path where they should have been walking. Her chest tightened. If they'd gone left, they would already be dead. The captain followed her gaze. His face paled. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The truth was written across the rocks, the silence now screaming louder than any order he could give. The men looked at her differently then, not as a ghost, not as a shadow, but as someone who carried knowledge they didn't, knowledge that had just saved their lives. But she didn't smile, didn't take pride. Because in her chest, beneath her jacket, the folded letter pressed heavier against her heart. A letter she hadn't opened because she already knew what it said. And that was why she was here. Not for them, not for the mission, not even for the orders she followed. She was here for him. The father who vanished in this silence. The silence she had carried ever since. And now, standing on the ridge, with the men staring at her as if she had pulled them back from the edge of death, she knew the truth couldn't stay buried forever. But not tonight. Not yet. She pulled her rifle closer, eyes sweeping the dark, and whispered to herself, so quiet the others didn't hear. Not here, not this time. What made them follow her after that night? It wasn't trust, not yet, it was survival. The convoy had returned to base at dawn, engines coughing smoke, tires coated in dust that clung like ash. No one spoke much during the ride back. The men stared out the windows, their silence stretched thin with the weight of what could have been. They had seen it, the shimmer of rifles in the distance, the trap waiting for them, and they had seen her call it before it happened. But no one asked her how. They didn't want to. Inside the debriefing tent, Light filtered through canvas in thin gold stripes. The air was stale, warmed by too many bodies and too little circulation. Officers circled, demanding reports. The captain cleared his throat, stepped forward, and delivered the summary. Movement to the ridge, near ambush avoided, team intact, no casualties. He didn't mention her. Not once. She stood at the back, hands tucked behind her, listening as if it were someone else's story. Her silence made her invisible, and yet she felt their glances flicker toward her in the corners of the room. The men who had walked beside her. They remembered. They would never say it aloud, but they knew the truth. The truth unsettled them. When the officers dismissed them, the men drifted out in clumps, boots dragging across packed dirt. The sun was high now, sharp and unforgiving, baking the camp in light that showed everything but revealed nothing. She stepped outside, squinting against the glare. Dust hung in the air, carried on wind that whistled faintly against metal fences. She walked past rows of tents, past the murmured laughter of men clinging to cigarettes, past the mechanics bent over a wounded vehicle. Each sound carved the air with its own rhythm, and she listened to it all. The bass was alive, noisy in a way the mountains weren't. But even here, surrounded by sound, she carried silence inside her. At the far edge of camp, she stopped, pulled the folded paper from her pocket. The letter, creased, worn, edges fraying from days of being pressed against her chest. She held it in both hands, staring at it as if her father's voice could rise from the ink. She hadn't opened it, she couldn't. Because once she did, the silence she carried would no longer belong to her. She slid it back into her pocket as footsteps approached. A shadow stretched across the dirt beside her. She didn't look up right away. "You saved us out there." The voice was rough, lower than the captain. One of the younger men, Corporal Reyes. He was wiry, restless, a man whose hands always twitched when idle, like his body couldn't contain the weight of his nerves. She finally turned. His face was drawn, eyes tired but searching. He wasn't smiling. "I didn't," she said quietly. "You did," he pressed, "if we'd gone left." "You'd be gone," she finished for him. The words hung between them, heavy and cold. Reyes shifted, rubbed the back of his neck. "How'd you know?" Her eyes flicked past him toward the horizon where the mountains clawed at the sky. She thought of telling him. Thought of the night years ago, standing in that same pass, waiting for a father who never returned. But the words didn't come. Instead, she only said, "I listen." Reyes frowned. It wasn't enough of an answer, but he didn't push her. He only nodded once, slowly, as if weighing whether to believe her, then walked away. She watched him go. The silence closed around her again. That night the camp buzzed with restless energy. Radios hissed with coded chatter, orders rippled through the ranks, and the men who should have been sleeping found themselves packing instead. The avoided ambush had left its mark. Survival didn't erase fear, it sharpened it. She lay in her cot, staring at the thin canvas above her, listening to the wind tugging at the tent seams. Sleep didn't come. It rarely did. Memories always came first. Her father's voice, low, steady, carrying lessons she hadn't wanted as a child but clung to as a soldier. Silence isn't empty. It's full of answers you're not ready to hear. She blinked, turned on her side, closed her hand over her chest where the letter pressed through the fabric of her shirt. Not tonight. The next morning came too soon. A runner shook her awake before dawn, his face pale. "Orders," he said breathlessly. "Briefing tent, now." She dressed quickly, laced her boots tight, pulled her jacket on. The air outside was cold, cutting through skin like thin blades. The sky was bruised with streaks of purple and gray, a sun not yet willing to rise. Inside the tent, tension coiled tighter than the night before. Maps covered the table again, new marks scrawled in red. The captain's voice was clipped, eyes shadowed with fatigue. "Intel confirms enemy movement north of the pass, heavily armed. We don't know where they'll strike, but we know it's soon." The men shifted, muttering low curses. She stayed silent, but her eyes tracked the lines, the marks, the same ridges she knew too well. The enemy wasn't moving north. Not yet. They were waiting. And she knew why. Her pulse quickened. She could feel the truth pressing at the back of her throat, begging to be spoken. But she swallowed it down, teeth clenched. If she revealed too much, if she spoke of things she shouldn't know, they would look at her differently. They might not follow her next time. The captain slammed his fist against the table. "We move in 2 hours. Be ready." The briefing ended. The men filed out. She lingered, staring at the map. "Something to say." The captain's voice cut the air, sharp and suspicious. Her lips parted. She almost told him, almost confessed the silence she carried. Instead, she shook her head. "No, sir." He studied her for a long moment, eyes narrow. Then he nodded curtly and left. She stood there alone, staring at the red marks until the canvas walls seemed to close around her. Her hands curled into fists. Because she knew the truth. If they followed the plan, men would die. But once again, she said nothing. 2 hours later, the convoy moved. Engines roared low, boots struck the ground in rhythm, weapons clinked softly against gear. The air was colder now, sharp enough to sting lungs. The mountains loomed ahead, dark against the pale sky. She walked with the second team, steps steady, eyes sweeping every shadow. Her silence didn't feel like a choice anymore. It felt like a burden. Reyes walked beside her, restless as always. "You don't buy it, do you?" he murmured, keeping his voice low enough that only she could hear. She glanced at him, surprised. "The intel," he clarified. "You don't think they're moving north?" She didn't answer, but he saw it in her eyes, the flicker of truth she couldn't hide. Reyes exhaled. "I knew it." He gave a short laugh, humorless. "Don't know how you do it, but you're never wrong, are you?" Her chest tightened. She thought of her father, of the silence she hadn't broken that night he vanished. She was wrong once, and it cost her everything. The team climbed higher, boots grinding against loose rock. The wind howled through the pass, carrying grit that stung their eyes. The sky brightened, but the light didn't warm. Then it happened. A sound too faint for most ears. The scrape of metal against stone. The shuffle of boots not belonging to their own. Her body froze. The captain barked an order ahead, oblivious. She grabbed Reyes by the arm, yanking him down behind a rock just as gunfire erupted. Bullets tore the air, stones splintered, men shouted. The pass exploded into chaos. But in the chaos she was calm. Because she had heard it before anyone else. Because silence had spoken to her. And this time she answered. What sound breaks a soldier's silence first, the scream or the bullet? The pass erupted in both. Gunfire shattered the morning, echoing between jagged stone walls like thunder trapped in a cage. Bullets cut the air, sharp and invisible, cracking past helmets and slamming into rock. Men shouted orders, some ducked, some scrambled, the rhythm of survival exploding into chaos. She didn't scream. She pressed flat against the stone, breath shallow, eyes narrowed. The world slowed in moments like these. Panic roared around her, but she listened for the spaces between shots, the pauses, the mistakes, the telltale pattern of an enemy who thought they owned the high ground. Reyes crouched beside her, chest heaving. His eyes were wide, darting wild. "They've got us pinned." "Not yet," she cut in softly. Her voice was calm, almost too calm against the storm. Reyes blinked at her, confused, then followed her gaze. The enemy was firing high, forcing them down. The pass was narrow, visibility limited, but she'd seen it before, heard it before. She shifted her rifle into place, cheek pressed against cold steel, scope catching faint glints of glass hidden in the rocks above. One breath, two. On the third, she fired. A sharp crack, a glass glint shattered, silence where one rifle had been. Reyes flinched at the precision, his head snapping toward her. But she wasn't done. Another breath, another shift, another shot, another silence. The men began to notice. Amid their own panic, they saw her move with deliberate calm, each shot not wild, not wasted, each one cutting away at the trap they'd walked into. The captain barked orders from ahead, voice hoarse, frustration bleeding into fear. Push forward, move. They couldn't. Forward was a choke point, a kill zone. He didn't see it, but she did. Stay down, she hissed at Reyes, dragging him back by his collar before he could obey. A bullet slammed into the rock where his head had been a heartbeat before. He stared at her, chest heaving, realization dawning. You knew. Her jaw tightened. She didn't answer. Because she had known. The silence of the pass had told her before the first shot rang out. The firefight dragged on, minutes stretching into a lifetime. Dust choked the air, rifles barked back and forth, rocks splintered into shrapnel. Men cursed, some prayed. She kept listening. Between the noise, between the chaos, she found the rhythm, and in that rhythm she found openings. Her bullets weren't louder than anyone else, but they carried a weight the others didn't. Each one pulled the team back from the brink. By the time reinforcements finally arrived, distant engines, heavier firepower grinding into the pass, the enemy broke. Shadows slipped back into the mountains, rifles falling silent one by one. The ambush dissolved into echoes, then into nothing. Silence returned. But it wasn't the same silence. It was heavier now. The men rose slowly, shaken, eyes scanning the rocks as if expecting another shot. Sweat mixed with dust streaked their faces. Some leaned against stone, catching breaths that felt too thin for lungs that needed air. The captain ripped off his helmet, slamming it against the ground. His face was red, jaw clenched tight. He looked at the bodies, the wounded, the debris of their survival. His eyes flicked to her. He didn't thank her. He couldn't. Because to thank her would be to admit he had been wrong. Instead, he spat to the side, barked orders to regroup, and turned away. The men followed him. Some limped, some carried the wounded, some stumbled with exhaustion. But every so often their eyes found her, not in gratitude, not in trust, but in something closer to unease. Reyes lingered. His face was pale beneath the dust, eyes still wide. If you hadn't pulled me down, his voice faltered. He swallowed hard. I'd be gone. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Because in her mind she didn't see Reyes. She saw another man, taller, broader, carrying himself with the quiet strength of someone who believed silence was enough. Her father. She saw him walking into the mountains, promising he'd return, and she saw the silence that came back instead. That night the camp was quieter than usual. No laughter, no restless packing, only the sounds of boots dragging, of whispered prayers, of grief too raw to speak aloud. She sat alone at the edge of camp, back against a crate, rifle across her knees. The stars were sharp above, cold and countless. The wind whispered through the fences, carrying the faint smell of smoke. Her hand found the folded paper in her pocket, the letter. She pulled it out, staring at the creased edges, the worn folds. Her father had written it years ago, the last thing he gave her before walking into the mountains. If I don't return, wait until you're ready to know. She had never opened it, never let the ink replace the silence. Reyes found her there. His steps were hesitant, crunching softly against the dirt. He stopped a few feet away, shifting awkwardly. Mind if I sit? He asked. She didn't answer, but she didn't stop him either. He sank down beside her, arms resting on his knees. For a long while they said nothing. Only the wind spoke between them. Finally, Reyes broke the silence. You scare them, you know. Her head turned slightly. His eyes were on the ground, his voice low. They don't get it, the way you just know things, it's not normal. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Hell, it's not normal to walk through a firefight like that either. She looked back at the stars. Her voice was soft. I'm not normal. Reyes glanced at her, but she didn't return it. You've been here before, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Her chest tightened. Ray's rubbed his face, exhaling. That's how you knew. That's why you're always so damn quiet. He shook his head. You've lost someone out here, haven't you? The silence between them stretched, fragile as glass. Finally she whispered, my father. Ray's froze. He didn't push, didn't ask how. He just nodded slowly, as if the single word explained more than she had spoken. She clutched the letter tighter, hiding it from view. Ray's leaned back, staring at the stars. For what it's worth, you saved us, twice now. His voice was steady, softer than usual. And I don't care what anyone else says, that's not luck, that's something else. She closed her eyes. She didn't want to be seen as something else. She only wanted the silence to end. But the silence never ended. The next morning, orders came again. The mission wasn't over. Intel pointed deeper into the mountains, where shadows hid answers too dangerous to ignore. The captain delivered the orders with steel in his voice. We move at dawn. The men groaned. Some cursed under their breath, but they prepared. She stood among them, silent as ever, her rifle slung over her shoulder, her eyes on the horizon. Because she knew what waited there. The same silence she had walked once before. The same silence that had taken her father. And this time she would walk into it again. Not because of orders, not because of duty, but because the truth she carried could no longer stay hidden. Not forever. Why did her hands tremble when no one was looking? The wind had picked up that night, pushing dust across the camp like whispers of a warning. The tents shivered under its weight, and the glow from the perimeter lamps stretched shadows long and thin. She sat on a crate near the far edge, the kind of place no one paid much attention to, her rifle resting against her knee, her eyes fixed on the horizon as if waiting for something only she could see. Around her, men laughed. A small group clustered by the fire pit, voices carrying through the night air, stories of home, stories of women, stories of what they would do once this was all over. One soldier told a story about his little boy back home who refused to sleep without the hum of the washing machine. Another spoke of a farm he left behind, cornfields that grew tall enough to swallow the horizon. They laughed, but beneath the laughter was exhaustion, an ache they buried under words. She listened quietly, letting their voices wash over her. She wanted to join in, to tell them she remembered the same hum of an old machine when she was a girl, that she too knew what it meant to lose the simple rhythm of home. But the words never reached her lips. Silence was safer. Silence was hers. Yet her hands trembled just slightly. She tucked them under her arms, pretending it was the cold, but it was. It was the memory of what she hadn't told them, what she couldn't. Because every time the campfire laughter rose, she heard another sound layered underneath it, boots on gravel, heavy and certain. The sound of men approaching her door years ago when she was still just a sister, just a daughter, not a soldier. She had hidden then too, but she hadn't been able to save the one person she loved most. And that truth, it followed her here, into every silence she carried. A shadow broke her thoughts. Not hungry, a voice asked. It was Ortega. He was one of the quieter ones, broad-shouldered, his eyes heavy with something deeper than fatigue. He crouched down near her crate, offering a dented canteen. She shook her head, but he set it beside her anyway. You sit out here every night, he said, not accusing, just noticing. Her lips parted, then closed again. She gave a small shrug. He studied her for a moment, then leaned forward. I used to sit like that, didn't talk to anyone, thought no one would understand. But the truth is, they don't need to. They just need to know you're still here. His words lingered. She didn't answer, but something in her chest shifted, like a crack in the armor she had welded around herself. But the moment didn't last. The radio crackled from the command tent. Urgent. A clipped voice broke through the static. We've got movement, possible contact, east perimeter. The laughter by the fire died instantly. Boots hit the dirt, gear clattered, rifles were snatched up, orders shouted, quick and sharp. The night was suddenly alive with tension. She rose in silence, her trembling gone, her focus snapping into place like a blade pulled from its sheath. The squad fanned out, pushing toward the east side of the camp. The air smelled of dust and metal, her boots sinking slightly with each step. Her eyes scanned the dark, her breathing even, steady. The world narrowed to the glow of the horizon, the faint suggestion of shapes in the distance. And then she saw it: movement. Not close but deliberate, too deliberate. Shadows slipping along the ridge, watching, waiting. Her finger brushed the trigger of her rifle, but she didn't fire. Not yet, she counted. 1, 2, 3 shapes, maybe more. The others didn't see them. Not yet. They were too focused on the obvious: the open ground, the wire fence, the way the desert stretched out endlessly. She whispered low, just enough for Ortega beside her to hear. Above the ridge, 3, maybe more. He froze, then followed her gaze. His face tightened. He signaled silently to the lieutenant, who adjusted the squad's formation. Slowly, quietly, without tipping their hand. For a moment it felt like nothing, just silence and waiting. And then the ridge exploded with light, gunfire sparking down like rain. The squad hit the dirt, shouts cutting through the chaos. Bullets chewed into the sand, ricocheting off metal, snapping overhead. Her cheek pressed against the ground, the taste of dust filling her mouth. Her heart hammered, but her mind was calm, focused. This wasn't the moment to tremble. This was the moment she was built for. She sighted her rifle, her breath slowing. One shadow at a time. Each squeeze of the trigger was quiet, controlled, deliberate. She didn't think of them as enemies. She didn't think of them at all. She only thought of the lives behind her, the laughter around the fire, the stories of cornfields, of little boys and washing machines. That was who she fired for. But even as the squad pushed back, even as the ridge began to fall silent again, she felt it, the echo inside her. The memory of a door kicked open, of boots on gravel, of the one she couldn't save. Her finger hesitated for just a fraction of a second on the trigger, and in that hesitation, Ortega's shout ripped through the night. Left side. She spun too late. A shadow rose from the darkness, closer than the others, rifle leveled. For a moment the world slowed, her silence, her secrets, her trembling hands all threatening to unravel. But Ortega moved first. He shoved her down, took the shot himself, and crumpled to the dirt. Her breath caught. The shadow fell, but so did Ortega. Around her the firefight bled into silence. The ridge was cleared. The squad regrouped. Orders barked, voices urgent. But all she could hear was the ragged breathing at her side. She pressed her hand against his wound, her heart pounding. His blood was warm against her skin, soaking into her sleeve. And in that moment, something inside her cracked fully open. Because it wasn't just a fight anymore. It wasn't just a mission. It was a mirror of what she had already lost, of what she couldn't bear to lose again. And as the others secured the ridge, as the desert fell quiet once more, she knew this silence was different. This silence carried a cost. A cost she could no longer keep hidden. Why did his breathing sound like it was fading away? The desert had gone still again, but her ears rang with the echo of gunfire. The air carried the iron scent of blood, sharp and undeniable. She pressed harder on Ortega's wound, her palms slick, her voice low, though she hadn't realized she was speaking until the words left her lips. "Stay with me. You're fine, you're fine." But he wasn't fine, she knew it. His eyes flickered, unfocused, darting as if he were chasing something he couldn't quite catch. His lips moved, but no sound came out, only a whisper of breath. "Medic," she shouted, her voice breaking through the chaos. Others were shouting too, spreading out across the ridge, securing the area. But for her, the fight was right here, in the fragile rise and fall of Ortega's chest. The medic slid in beside her, dropping to his knees. "Pressure," he barked, and she obeyed, holding steady as bandages unrolled, hands worked fast. The world shrank to the square of earth beneath them, the dirt dark with blood. And in that moment, as the medic worked, Ortega's hand twitched. He caught her wrist, weak but deliberate. His lips formed a word she barely heard over the rush in her ears. "Why you?" Her throat tightened. She didn't answer. She couldn't. His grip loosened, slipping away, his eyes rolling closed as the medic leaned in. "He's got a chance," the medic muttered, his tone clipped urgent. "We need evac now." Orders cracked across the ridge, radios hissed. A bird was called in, dust already spinning in her imagination as if willing the helicopter into existence. But she stayed kneeling, her hands coated in the truth she could no longer ignore. Because Ortega wasn't just a casualty. He was the one who had noticed her silence, who had left a canteen beside her without asking for words. And now he had stepped into the path meant for her. The helicopter came fast, blades chopping the night, lights cutting the dark into hard angles. Ortega was lifted, strapped, carried away in a blur of noise and urgency. She stayed behind, standing stiff, her rifle hanging heavy from her shoulder. And in that new silence, questions pressed in. Why him, why not her? The squad regrouped as the helicopter's glow faded into the night sky. The lieutenant's voice cut sharp through the desert air. "We move back. Stay sharp. That wasn't random, they were probing, testing us." The others nodded, tightened their gear, checked their weapons. They were soldiers, trained to keep moving, to focus on the next step, the next fight. But she couldn't move. Not yet. Her boots stayed planted, her eyes drawn back to the ridge where Ortega had fallen. She could still see his blood darkening the sand, still feel his hand around her wrist, his unfinished question hanging heavy in the air. "Why you?" The squad began the walk back to camp, the desert crunching under their boots. She followed in silence, her breath shallow, her mind churning. Every step felt heavier than the last. Because she knew the answer to Ortega's question. She had always known, but she had buried it deep, in a silence no one had dared to break. It wasn't chance that brought her here. It wasn't fate, it was guilt. The memory rose again, sharp as broken glass, her brother's voice calling for her, the boots outside their home, the moment she stayed hidden, too afraid to move while he was dragged away. She had done nothing. She had been silent, and she had carried that silence ever since. The camp's glow appeared in the distance, lanterns flickering against the desert wind. Laughter was gone now, replaced by whispers, by the low hum of radios, by the shuffling of weary feet. The weight of the night pressed down on all of them. Inside the tent, the lieutenant spread out maps, his voice firm as he outlined what came next. "They're testing weak spots. Tonight was the start. They'll be back." His gaze swept the room, landing briefly on her. He didn't ask, but she felt the unspoken expectation, readiness. She sat in the corner, silent, her rifle across her lap. The others listened, some leaning forward, some rubbing their eyes, some lost in thoughts of home. And she thought about Ortega, strapped into a helicopter, his blood still drying on her skin. She thought about her brother, his voice echoing in her head, a voice she could never answer. Her silence was no longer safe. It was suffocating. Later, when the tent emptied and the camp fell quiet, she walked back to her crate by the edge. The desert stretched wide before her, stars burning cold above. She sat, her shoulders heavy, her breath uneven. The silence pressed in, but this time she didn't hide in it. This time she spoke, though only to the night. "I should have done something," she whispered. The words cracked in the air, fragile, raw, back then, and tonight. Her eyes burned, but no tears fell. She had learned to hold them in long ago. But the words hung there, carried by the wind, a confession to no one and to everything. The silence didn't answer. It never did. Still, for the first time, she had broken it herself. And she knew what had to come next. Because Ortega's question wasn't just his, it was hers. "Why you?" And somewhere in that question lay the truth she had been running from, the truth her quiet eyes could no longer hide. What if silence was no longer enough? The night after Ortega was flown out, the camp felt wrong, not just quiet or hollow, as if his absence had carved out something more than space. She heard it in the way the men spoke, softer, their words clipped. She saw it in the lieutenant's eyes, scanning the horizon more often, his jaw tighter. Even the fire crackled differently, its warmth unable to chase away the cold creeping into all of them. She sat by herself, as always, rifle resting across her knees. But now, the silence she carried wasn't just hers, it felt shared. Every soldier there was holding a different piece of it, and yet somehow all of it pressed against her chest. The others kept their distance, but one didn't. "Mind if I sit?" It was Ramirez. He wasn't the kind who filled the air with noise. His words always came slow, careful, like stones placed one by one. She gave the smallest nod, and he lowered himself onto the crate beside her, his breath visible in the cool desert air. For a while they said nothing. The stars stretched overhead, the fire's glow faint behind them, and then he asked, "You blame yourself, don't you?" Her fingers tightened around the rifle's stock. She didn't look at him. "Ortega," he continued, "what happened wasn't on you. He made a choice. We all would have." Her throat ached. She wanted to answer, to tell him he was wrong, that this wasn't the first time someone had bled because of her silence. But the words caught, stuck behind the wall she had built. Instead, she only said, "He asked me why." Ramirez tilted his head. "Why what?" She shook her head, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "Doesn't matter." But it did matter. She knew it did. And the silence between them stretched heavy, almost unbearable. Finally, Ramirez leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His voice dropped low, steady. "You know, I lost my sister, car crash, back home. She was the only family I had left, and I wasn't there. I still ask myself why. Why her, not me? Why that night? Why didn't I do something different? And I never get an answer, never will, but I talk about it anyway." His words cut deep, not because of what he said, but because of what he gave her. Permission, a mirror, a path she wasn't sure she had the strength to walk. The fire popped in the distance. A coyote's cry broke the silence. She swallowed hard, her lips parting before she even realized she was speaking. "My brother," she whispered. The sound of his name never left her lips, but the truth bled into the air all the same. Ramirez didn't move, didn't press. He only waited. Her eyes blurred against the starlight. "They came for him. I didn't stop them. I didn't even try. I just stayed quiet, too quiet." Her voice cracked, thin as glass. "And I've been carrying that silence ever since." Ramirez's hand tightened briefly on his knee, but he didn't interrupt. "I thought maybe if I came here, if I fought, if I kept my mouth shut and did my job, maybe I could make up for it." She forced the words out, raw and uneven. "But it doesn't change the fact that I didn't save him. I didn't save Ortega either." Her shoulders shook, though no tears fell. The silence afterward felt different now, lighter but sharper too, like a blade pulled from a sheath. Ramirez exhaled slowly. "You can't save everyone. None of us can, but you're here, and that matters more than you think." She wanted to believe him, but belief wasn't something she carried easily. The lieutenant's voice cut through the night then, pulling them back. "Briefing, now." Inside the tent, the air was tense. The map lay spread across the table, marked with fresh lines. The lieutenant's tone was clipped, urgent. "Scouts confirm enemy buildup East Ridge. They'll push hard soon. They think Ortega's hit makes us weaker." His eyes swept the room. "They're wrong." The squad leaned in, eyes sharp, focused. But she felt the weight of every gaze shift to her. Not accusing, not questioning, just waiting for something she wasn't used to giving. And for the first time, she met their eyes. Her voice was low, steady. "They'll come at night. They'll use the ridge again. Same pattern, but heavier. They think we're blind." The lieutenant studied her for a beat, then nodded slowly. "You've been watching." She gave the smallest nod. "Good," he said, marking the map. "Then we'll use that, set the trap before they do." The others nodded, murmurs of agreement moving through the tent. She sat quietly, but inside something shifted. For once her silence hadn't hidden her. It had prepared her. Later, as the squad readied their gear, Ramirez passed by her. He didn't say much, just a quiet, "Your brother would have been proud." Her chest tightened, a mix of pain and something close to hope. She didn't answer, she didn't need to. But when the night came and the desert whispered again, she knew this time her silence wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't just be about hiding. It would be about listening, about waiting, about answering when it mattered most. And in the darkness, with the ridge looming ahead, she realized her quiet eyes no longer just hid the truth. They carried it forward. What if the silence wasn't fear anymore? What if it was the weapon? The desert waited. Black sky stretched wide, a sheet of ink pricked with cold stars. The ridge crouched in the distance, its jagged edge a shadow cutting across the horizon. No fire tonight, no laughter, no stories of cornfields or washing machines. Only breath and boots, muffled and steady, the squad moving into position like shadows of their own. She lay prone, rifle against her shoulder, her cheek pressed to the scope. Her heartbeat was slow, measured. The ground beneath her was cool, the sand shifting just slightly as the night wind slid past. Beside her, Ramirez adjusted his sight, his movements deliberate. No one spoke. The silence was total, alive, pulsing, a silence she no longer feared. Because tonight silence wasn't hiding, it was listening. She watched the ridge through her scope, every shadow, every flicker. The world narrowed to the glass circle before her eye. For long minutes nothing, just stillness, just waiting. And then movement, small, careful, shadows slipping against shadows. The enemy thought themselves ghosts. Her breath stilled. 1, 2, 5 shapes, more stretching back. They moved with intent, testing again, but bolder this time. They thought the ridge was theirs. She didn't move, didn't fire. Her finger rested just above the trigger, her lungs drawing in air so quiet it hardly stirred her chest. The lieutenant's plan was simple. Let them think they had surprise. Let them come closer, then close the trap. Minutes dragged. The squad held still, muscles taut, the kind of stillness that burned through the body until it became almost unbearable. But she didn't waver. Her silence held. The enemy crept closer, rifles glinting under starlight, boots sinking into the sand. They reached the wire. They were confident now. They thought they knew weakness. The lieutenant's hand rose slowly, clenched in the dark. A signal, not yet, not yet. Her scope tracked one soldier, his movements too assured, too practiced. A leader, maybe. She steadied her breath, her finger hovering. Her mind flickered, not to fear, not to guilt, but to Ortega strapped to that helicopter, to her brother's voice lost in the dark, to every silence she had carried. This was the moment to answer. The lieutenant's hand dropped. The night erupted. Muzzle flashes tore through the dark, the ridge alive with fire and thunder. The enemy froze, caught off guard, their formation shredded before it even settled. Shouts cut the air, orders scrambled, boots scattering. Her rifle barked, steady, measured. Each shot deliberate, each breath a rhythm. Ramirez covered the flank, his fire controlled. The squad moved as one, their silence breaking into force. But through the chaos she felt it, the difference in herself. No trembling, no hesitation. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was choosing. The enemy faltered, their push broken, their shadows scattering back into the ridge. Some dropped weapons, retreating into the desert. The squad held ground, their lines firm. And then silence again. Sudden, jarring. Only the smoke and the acrid scent of gunpowder lingered. Her cheek lifted from the scope, her breath ragged but steady. Around her the others scanned, called out low confirmations. The lieutenant's voice carried firm. Hold positions. Stay sharp. They'll think twice before testing this ridge again. She lowered her rifle, the weight of it settling across her chest. For the first time she felt her silence differently. Not as a chain, not as guilt, but as strength, the kind that listens, that waits, that acts only when it must. Ramirez glanced her way, sweat streaking through the dust on his face. He didn't speak, just gave her a nod, firm and certain. She nodded back. The ridge was theirs, the night was theirs. But inside her, she knew the real battle was not finished. Ortega's blood was still on her sleeves, her brother's absence still carved into her silence. Victory didn't erase those truths. And yet, for the first time, she felt like she had answered them, if only a little. The camp returned slowly to life, radios crackling with reports, hands checking gear, voices hushed but steady. She moved back to her crate at the edge of the camp, the desert stretching wide before her. Her rifle rested across her knees again. Her silence sat beside her. But now it was no longer the silence of hiding. It was the silence of someone who had spoken without words, through patience, through aim, through a choice that mattered. And though the night still carried ghosts, she felt, for the first time, that she wasn't carrying them alone. The stars burned cold above, unchanging, eternal, but something in her had shifted. And as she stared into the horizon, quiet eyes reflecting the faint glow of campfires and starlight, she wondered, what truth would tomorrow demand of her silence? Could silence ever speak loud enough to change a life? The sun rose over the desert, slow and unyielding, spilling light across the camp like molten gold. Shadows shrank, revealing the scars of the night, the disturbed sand, the spent casings, the faint stains of blood still dark against the dirt. She walked among them, boots crunching, shoulders squared, rifle resting against her hip. The squad moved around her, bodies tense, faces still drawn, but she noticed something different. Respect, subtle but unmistakable, threaded through their glances. The lieutenant called the morning briefing, and she took her place among the squad. Eyes met hers briefly, some lingering longer than necessary. For the first time, her silence wasn't a mystery to them. It was a presence, a steadying force. Her mind drifted briefly to Ortega. Alive, yes, but changed. She hadn't seen him since the helicopter lifted him out of the ridge, and the thought of his bloodied fingers gripping her still haunted her. She wondered what he had thought in those moments, what he had felt knowing she had acted in the split second that separated life from death. Intel confirms, the lieutenant's voice cut through her reflection. Enemy movement is minimal today, likely regrouping, but reconnaissance shows increased patrols west of the ridge. They're probing, testing defenses. Her gaze settled on the horizon, where the desert shimmered in heat, and for a moment she allowed herself to breathe without thinking of the next danger. She thought of her brother, of her father, of Ortega, and for the first time she let herself imagine a future beyond survival. Ramirez leaned in, voice low. You did well yesterday, all of us, but you led, even if you didn't say a word. She looked at him, her eyes softening. I only acted when it mattered. He smiled faintly, understanding more in that simple phrase than she could explain. Hours passed, routine movements and patrols, checking positions, ensuring nothing remained unchecked from the previous night. And then, as the sun arced high, dust rising with each step of patrolling soldiers, a shadow fell across her path, a familiar figure, pale under the light, limping slightly but alive. Ortega. Her chest constricted. Relief, fear, gratitude, and guilt all collided, twisting into something raw and bright. She moved toward him, hands instinctively reaching for his shoulder. He looked up at her, eyes wide, then softened. You saved me, he said, voice hoarse but steady. Not by luck, by choice. Her throat closed. Words failed her, as they always did when the weight of truth pressed against her silence. You didn't hesitate, he continued, shaking his head faintly. You've carried too much alone, haven't you? Her gaze fell, always. Ortega's hand found hers again, lighter this time. Not anymore, you're not alone, not anymore. The squad noticed the reunion, but they didn't intrude. Even the lieutenant watched from a distance, arms crossed, silently approving. Later, as the sun dipped lower, painting the desert gold and amber, she sat at the edge of camp, rifle resting across her knees, Ortega beside her. Silence stretched between them, not empty, not oppressive, but full. Full of understanding, full of words left unspoken but felt. "I never told anyone," she said softly, eyes on the horizon, "about my brother, about everything I've carried." Ortega's grip tightened slightly. "Doesn't matter. What matters is what you do now, what you choose. You've answered the question before anyone had to ask it." Her eyes lifted, meeting the faint glimmer of the first stars appearing in the early evening sky. And she understood. Her silence had spoken in moments of precision, in choices made when lives hung by a thread, in restraint, in courage. She hadn't needed to explain. She hadn't needed to justify. And in that understanding, a quiet redemption bloomed. The camp settled around them, men preparing for the night patrols, the routine of duty resuming. But her eyes remained on the ridge, the horizon, the path ahead. She knew there would be more tests, more moments when silence would be both shield and weapon. Yet she no longer feared it. Because she had learned that sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Ortega squeezed her hand gently, breaking the thought. "You're going to be all right," he said. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both relief and remembrance. "We're going to be all right," she corrected. The wind picked up again, brushing across the desert like a promise. Stars began to burn brighter in the deepening twilight, and she sat, rifle across her knees, eyes soft but vigilant, surrounded by those who had learned to trust her silence, and by the quiet strength she had always carried alone. The desert stretched endlessly, but for the first time it didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a place where choices, actions, and quiet courage could speak louder than any words ever could. And as the camp settled into a fragile night, the last light glimmering across sand and stone, she closed her eyes for a moment. Because she had spoken, and she had acted. And sometimes that was enough.